and welcome to our 39th podcast. Today we'll be talking about moving from research to reality, featuring an IO practitioner perspective with our special guests, Jen Adelhardt and Larry DeCicco. What's the one thing you could do now to translate theory into practice? Keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces.
Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're so glad to have you with us today. I'm Rich Cruz, an OD practitioner, and I'm joined by my co-host, Cheryl Volpe. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Rich. Hi, everyone.
And Ben Kleinman.
Hey, everyone.
And we are joined by two guests today. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got Jen Adelhardt and, Adelhardt. I don't know why I did that. I did it again. But welcome, Jen. How are you?
Hi, great. Thank you so much for having us today.
And Larry DeCicco. How are you, Larry?
Spectacular. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. And so in this virtual room today, we've got four people who have studied industrial organizational psychology. And Ben, you're the odd person out here.
I'm the lone outsider here, so I'm just going to
outsider.
kick back and watch the sparks fly.
But the reality is, we have an MBA from Northwestern, so he's pretty plugged into how we think, And so we're coming at this episode specifically from an IO perspective. So maybe we should start with what is IO and
what does IO mean? And
what is it? Right. Our first acronym of the day, by the way, in like just a couple of seconds. So take it away.
Yeah. So maybe Larry and Jen, for the folks out there like me who are not super well versed in IO or psychology, let's just do a quick primer on what is the aspects of psychology that you bring to IO, what is IO, and then we can dig into how that manifests and how to make life better for people at work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jen, you want to go ahead and go first? Go ahead.
Sure. So IO stands for industrial and organizational. So IO psychology, industrial and organizational psychology. And essentially it is the field of study that applies psychology, how us humans think, to the workplace in order to actually improve workplace performance and organizational efficiency. So it really takes a look at the principles and the theories behind why people do what they do and how we can utilize that to make great working environments and business successful. Because at the end of the day, that's what the businesses want to.
That's exactly right.
I love that.
No, I would just add too, we can all survive in the workplace because we've been doing it for years. But IO psychology really takes it to where we can have people thrive in the workplace. And I think that's the big thing, that next level from a psychology perspective.
I love that. So moving from thrive to, or from survive to thrive. Yeah, this is why I'm not one of the IO practitioners, but moving from just sort of surviving, getting along to really maximizing your potential, and hopefully the business does well as part of that too.
Right.
Before we dive in, maybe Jen and Larry, just give a brief background of what you do and how you came into the world of IO Psych, why that's appealing to you, and sort of what you're focused on now. And that, I imagine, it's a pretty broad field. So what your area of interest is.
Go ahead, Jen.
Ready to kick it off?
Yeah.
Kick it.
Or do you want me to kick it off?
Go ahead. Jen.
All right. So let's see. This goes back a ways. I earned a an undergraduate degree from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, or RPI, in information technology, and then had an accidental second major in psychology with a focus in IO Psych. And that was because I found it so interesting throughout my course as an undergrad in college that I ended up taking all of my electives in psychology. And when I went to the humanities department and said, well, I think I have enough for a minor, they actually looked at me and said, well, if you do a thesis, you have enough for a major. And I said, okay, sure, sounds good to me. So I ended up doing a double major a double major in information technology and psychology. I then, a few years later, went on to get a master's in information systems. My company paid for it for the most part. Always highly recommended. Use your tuition reimbursement benefits, everyone. Huge benefit. And then most recently, I am currently in a doctorate of business administration program. So I'm a doctorate of business administration scholar at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where my research interests are focused on the workplace and how people can thrive. So it's really come full circle for me in all of this. I've spent almost 20 years in industry, in the financial services industry, but really taking a look at how to utilize technology to solve human problems. I absolutely adore figuring out problems and how to best solve them, and with the technological aspect there as well. And so bringing this all together and all back to me, and where this all falls in with IO Psych is the fact that I realized a couple of years ago that I wanted something deeper, to go more into the theory and understand the why and the general academic premise for a lot of what we do in the workplace, and be able to utilize that and connect it with making better working environments for everyone.
Sure.
So that's sort of the approach that I'm coming at it from, and I'm in the middle of my Doctorate of Business Administration program, where I'm really excited that I get to do this type of research, really dive into the theories behind this, and then really where the rubber meets the road is how we connect academic research with industry practice.
I love the focus on why. That's something that we keep coming back to over the course of all of our episodes. We always seem to naturally gravitate towards why is a company trying to do something? Why is a person acting in a certain way? And what that can help us unpack and uncover. So that's totally fantastic.
Right. And then really quickly to that point of the why is the connection points between having our people do the best work that they possibly can. Because if you ask anyone, your most important, most valuable resources are your people. And so how do we make that so that the individual can thrive and that helps businesses to thrive? So it's ultimately a win-win situation at the end of the day.
It does. And when that why resonates across the organization, that fuels purpose, and that is connected deeply to motivation. Right.
Yeah.
So great. Thank you.
And Larry, what's brought you into this?
Yeah. So what I love about this is, Jen and I have been working together, or used to work together for a long time. And the IO psychology field is so widespread and just has so many amazing backgrounds. So I love the fact that is the one thing that IO brings together, is people with different backgrounds. So, I started in the financial industry as well, long time ago. I never got into psychology until much later in life, but I was always interested in it. And when I look back, seeing I was a leader for a long time, people leader, and I always tried to find the best out of people. I always hated that old school kind of, you show up to the office, you're lucky to have a job, and you do the job, and then you go home. And this is, it's much more of a employer-centric job versus employee.
Sure.
And I just kept reading books, had a long drive in to work for many years. And I went back to school, got my MBA, And then I realized how important psychology was, and IO psychology kept popping up in a lot of these books. And then, as Jen mentioned, the tuition reimbursement program. And I said, you know what, let's give it a jump. And here I am. And I think I love the fact that I feel like I've been in the trenches for a very long time, from frontline sales, frontline leader, frontline support. And so that really helps me understand both sides from an academia standpoint, research standpoint, and then actual, doing the job standpoint.
Very good. I love that. This seems to be kind of a thread with our guests, right? So we had Russ Lang on earlier, and he had this thrive number. So the two of you bringing the word thrive into here takes me back to that. And I think that's so important to bring into these organizations, that, it's not just about like, you're lucky to come here to have a job, right? Yeah. This is a very integrated part of your life work, right? And we need to live, thrive, and survive. And this that thrive part is very important. So,
well, I think that's the roots of the industrial part of the IO, right? That industrial part was that factory mentality, right? You're lucky to have this job. You come in, you clock in. The organizational aspect is the key aspect, that the people are part of it. You and how you feel about this work matters. How you are motivated to do this work, the reward that you perceive through this work. All of those things came with the O part of it over time, right? That's what makes it so great.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. And to your point on that, I think what's really, really important here is also to acknowledge that work has changed over time, right? So we've gone from industrial, here's your widget, or actually we've gone from very craftsman to then industrial. Here's your widget. Here's the assembly line. You're responsible for this one thing, right? And do that thing over and over. More now into the knowledge base worker. And frankly, if we're looking ahead, especially with the onset of AI, we're now looking at AI taking over some of the pieces of the knowledge-based worker. And then the human factor, the human element, is that creativity, right? So if we're taking a look at the human element that where humans still will be able to thrive even with artificial intelligence, we really need to think about the spaces and the work environments in which we can thrive and be our most creative, be our most innovative selves. And that's really, I believe, what is going to kind of come next.
Such a neat perspective, Jen, to bring that back to the craftsmanship, almost the innovative part, right? That full circle.
Right. It's essentially come full circle.
Very interesting. Yeah.
For sure. So you had talked about bringing theory and into practice, right? So when does that work? Because we've talked about this. I've been on some podcasts, I'm part of that Work Cookie podcast. Maybe you've ever heard of that? That's through the Society of Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting. And we talk about that in practice or in theory. This works in theory, but in practice, this is what happens. But can you talk a little bit about bringing that theory into practice in the workplace?
Absolutely. Jen, you want to go first again, or you want me to switch it up?
Well, I would just tee it up in saying it works when it can be translated and applied, right? And that in and of itself, let's just understand, can sometimes be tough. Academia has a bit of a different language than industry. And when I say a bit of, they're two different languages altogether. So translation is required in order to really help with that process. So I just wanted to tee it up with that.
And the interpretation is where the color comes into it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Jen, can I just jump in real quick? Because that word translation makes me think of something else you mentioned before about being in IT and engineering, and then doing stuff on the humanities side as well. And I feel like in the circles I've traveled, there's always a need or someone who's really good at bridging those two. And it's a translator role. It's almost like when you go to a foreign country and you need a guide or someone to translate from your language to whatever the local language is. And it's the same. And what I guess I'm wondering, long question is it the same kind of thing, translating academic theory into practical situation-based things that you can apply that you would do? Is it the same kind of translation as translating, let's say, IT speak to human speak, or vice versa, translating a user requirement to something that a developer could implement?
Yeah, this is where Jen and I are very aligned, very closely. And I'll just jump on the IT example because I think that's the easiest to use, right? Because how many times do you hear people say, well, can you just not speak to me in programming language, right? Or vice versa. And you always hear, especially nowadays with these huge IT organizations, that, companies are tech first, and then it's their industry, right? The product or service they're selling, but they have to be tech first, and they need those folks who can translate between what is needed and the people actually doing the work, and then leadership on the direction and how it can work together. And it absolutely goes the same way for IO psychologists. It has to be the fact that you've got to understand the academia piece, but you also have to understand the business piece in real world practice. Because at the end of the day, if you weren't the one building those widgets, you're not going to know what their day in, day out life is like when they're building those widgets.
That's right.
Right.
Cool. Thank you. I'm sorry I derailed. That's
no,
helpful.
I am
Ben, keep going.
really happy you asked that question, Ben, because it also brings me back, that translation piece. If you would have asked me when I was an undergrad in college what I wanted to do when I grew up, it was to translate between technology and the business. And what's really interesting is, and that's sort of where my interests came into play. And if you look at what I have done throughout my career, a lot of it is that. And now it's this evolution into translating between academia and the business, and then pulling those pieces in. And to your point, the ability to bridge the worlds, I think, makes a world of difference.
That makes sense. I think that's one of the things that attracted me to IO2 was, I went through, like Larry, I had an MBA, and I went back to I had no interest in psychology. It didn't want. I thought it was just for therapists, and that's all it was.
Wow.
I did not want to.
I thought you were like Captain Psych.
No, absolutely not. No,
Huh.
I was an art major, man, earlier on. But in marketing, right, everything shifted over to digital marketing, and then so working with CRM systems and all that became transformative in every organization that I was in. So,
CRM?
Customer relationship management.
Thank you.
So bringing those database systems and other things like different other organization-wide systems. I'm not going to get into a bunch of acronyms, but it has a transformative effect on the culture of the overall culture of the organization, right? And so it's always been that development side, that kind of the art and science of trying to get somebody to change their way of thinking and change their behaviors to move into adoption, if that makes sense. So I very much align with what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we talk a lot about change, Larry and Jen. Our podcast the underlying premise is about change and change management. It's our tagline, make change your friend, because there is resistance there. So just having the idea that an interpretation between one era and another in terms of technical transformations, even that kind of change, which we take for granted now, is still AI is the next one. A lot of resistance there, a lot of fear. That interpretation is more important than ever. Right.
Sure.
Well, I'll also say too, in my practice, there is a definite link that seems to be the strongest link between IO Psych and change. And over the years of school that I've been doing, change. I remember we studied change for a short amount of time, maybe 10% of the whole program, right? But for me personally, and the way I see in the work environment, leading leaders, the change piece is such a big part. The IO psychology practice drives the change initiatives
when they are combined, right?
Correct.
When the one exists, the other is more likely to succeed.
Using the principles in IO psych to get the change environment really is truly beneficial versus just having. I'm a ProSci certified change practitioner, and that's only a 3 or 4 day course, and then an IO psych program, right? That's a whole master's, and there's just so much more out there that will help drive the change. It's the continuous change versus episodic change. If you can build out a continuous change environment, but how do you do that?
We have a whole episode about that.
There you go. Exactly. So,
well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about maybe when the theory doesn't meet practice. Right?
Perfect.
Cool. All right. So we'll be right back.
Sounds like a fun time.
At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So we are joined with our guests, Jen and Larry, and we were talking about bringing the theory of industrial organizational IO psychology into the workplace in practice. But then there's the other side of things when it's all theory and it's not really working in the workplace, right? So could you kind of address some of that and some of those challenges that we have in the workplace when it just doesn't happen?
Absolutely, because it's fantastic when theory works in practice. We would love for that to work all the time, but let's be honest with ourselves, and that is not always the case, right? And there are a number of reasons for that, right? You can't necessarily take a dense academic paper and just say, here you go, business XYZ, just apply this. And that's because when we talk about theory, these are broad frameworks that are based on years or even decades of research across massive, if you're lucky, populations, but at least representative populations, right? But that also means that it doesn't take into account necessarily nuances of an individual business. So Larry had mentioned before about where you go into a business and it doesn't necessarily work that specific way. And that's where a lot of the input from the business people who work there, et cetera, is really, really required. Theory provides a great framework and is imperative to understand if you're going to want to do things without having to reinvent the wheel and to take potentially best in class type of practices. And so when we think about that, it's about the population size, right? When a single executive makes a decision, you have a population size of 1, sample size of 1. It might be a really deep, knowledgeable, experienced sample size of 1, but it is still a sample size of 1. And so we want to go back to that theory and pull that in. But without that translation piece, it really doesn't necessarily always meet the needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
back to
we
translation.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just back to translation.
Back to translation, right? And so consulting with the research and the theory helps us to understand those broader contexts, the broader context that's drawn from those representative samples, but there's that translation piece that is needed and required to have whatever that theory is work well in a particular environment, right? And that doesn't always happen, especially without that translation.
So what I'm hearing, and this is exactly, is the lack of a translator, right? So when a theory doesn't work, I would blame it on the practitioner, right? The change practitioner. But was there a change practitioner assigned? So if you don't have a translator and you have someone that, maybe more of a project manager, or someone that hasn't had the background of the academia side, they're not going to know the principles that could align with that real world implementation, right?
Sure.
And so I've seen it many times where you have folks who they'll implement the product or service is implemented, but then who's there to follow up to make sure it's being used correctly, right?
Sure.
And that's actually part of some of the ProSci, which is the reinforcement piece, where it's like, if there's no change practitioner following up, how do we know if the ROI is really worth the implementation of the project?
Mm-hmm.
And all is said, there are so many theories out there that have such incredible principles. If you have someone like Jen or I going in, and anyone on this team, to be honest, going in understanding that there are theories and there's reality, that translator will be tremendous in making sure it's a success.
So how can we bring this to be more accessible and practical, and to translate that better in the workplace?
Ooh, great question. I would say, as if I was strictly an academia IO psychologist, I would say bring in as many frontline folks as you can. Get to understand, just like Jen and I are working, the other side, right? We're working academia now, right? But we've been in the front lines for a long time. And I feel like it should be vice versa. As an academic, PhD, whatever the case, get involved in we used to, way back when, we used to call them just, job shadowing, right? One-on-ones that they can actually see what's going on from a day-to-day job and hear and feel what that employee is doing.
Sure.
Right. Sure. And I'll add to that a little bit here in saying that, let's be honest with ourselves. In theory, we have a lot of really great ideas about this. In practice, it is a lot more difficult to implement. So we'll just even apply it to what we're talking about right now. But if we could get more of the academic rigor in industry practice and more of the industry experiences, examples, and customer facing aspects into academia, we have a better shot at bridging the two worlds, right? and I'm talking about them as if they're like light years apart. They're, in some cases, especially with theory, yes, they can be light years apart, but there are more practitioner focused spaces as well that help to bring these concepts together. And so I think, like Larry is saying, it's highly important to make sure that your customer, whatever that end customer is, whoever that entity is that we're trying to solve the problem for, is involved from the get-go, right? Mm-hmm. My husband likes to remind me occasionally, stop solving problems that don't exist.
Your mind will create the problem just so you can solve it.
So is it really a problem? Are we trying to solve it? But for whom are we trying to solve it? And so bringing those pieces together, I think, are really important. Understand the incredible depth of research that goes into theory building, and then bring that with that translation into industry so that we can apply it in ways that work best in whatever that environment is. So there is that, again, I know we keep going back to this translation piece, but you'll see people who do this well. I am a huge fan of Adam Grant.
Mm-hmm.
He is a phenomenal example of an academic who has made his field understandable and relatable to industry practitioners.
Right.
With 1, 2, and 3 liners that he posts on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc., to really hone in on what are those key principles and concepts that people, and especially leaders, should be thinking about. And then how you implement that key principle or concept may vary from workplace to workplace, but that key concept stays the same.
That's
right?
it. Yep.
And Jen, to your point, and Larry's also about the culture, when you have a learning culture and academia is brought in a more integrated format, it takes the emphasis off that interpretation. It makes it less important for that translation because the academia and the business are more integrated, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And ideally, at the end of the day, you don't need translators because we're all speaking the same language, right? But also, when we don't speak the same language, you have levels of creativity there as well. So there are pros and cons to both. But completely agree. The more you can bring those together, I think the better off everyone is going to understand it. So
and it sounds like there's a level of intentionality too, in terms of really looking at what's happening in that academic world or that research paper that might apply to our company, but then thinking about how do we actually, like you were just saying with Adam Grant, there's a key concept, but then how do you apply that in our unique situation with our customer base, with our employee base, with the tools and technologies that we have? And so it's almost like bringing that level of, we want to make the change. We're not just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, but we're going to intentionally think about bringing the right people to the right task, having those translators, having the right concept at the right time, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think it helps for the more industry examples we can give based on these theories, the better. I am also a huge fan of Dr. Amy Edmondson. She wrote the book, The Fearless Organization, also Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, with tons of industry examples from companies that we all know, like Toyota and Boeing and whatnot, to really pick apart and understand what went well and what went wrong, so that we can learn from others as well in a language that people can relate to and understand, even in industry. So that's another aspect or another way to help to bridge that.
Mm-hmm.
She also talked about psychological safety, right?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That was one of her major ideas to put across the work. So undercurrent through all of these.
She is the godmother of psychological safety. It was her seminal paper that brought us to, and we're going to go geek out on academia here, right? The concept of team psychological safety and the power of bringing out ideas in a team when psychological safety is present. I am a huge fan and think that psychological safety is absolutely critical for any workplace to be truly successful.
Before I would love to dive more into that. Before we do, Larry, it sounded like you had a point around intentionality.
Yeah. All right. So then, from a standpoint of, I wanted to switch it up a little. Think of it as a leader, you're not going to have the time to learn IO psychology tactics or principles, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm not going to go back to school. I'm not. So what do you do when you have blind spots? You hire, right? You hire the folks who are the experts.
Hire Larry and Jen.
Yeah. Well, but the point of the matter is that, project PMO organization is great, right? Yeah, exactly. There you go. So at the end of the day, you get the experts in who can help out with that versus just trying to wing it and follow a process that you're not quite sure. Like a perfect example is like Kotter's change model, right? There's 8 steps to it. It's really
Rich's eyes are bulging.
I know. Like ding, 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 ding.
fairly easy to follow. But when I was implementing a change piece and I was using that model, I took out 2 of the steps because I knew as a leader of those folks, but also doing the job at one time in my career, I realized that that step isn't going to work and is not necessary. Now, granted, I used a lot of experience and knowledge from that decision, but how do you expect a leader to do that? Like it's not something that will come easy without having the time spent from those 2. So that's my piece.
Right. And it's not always the same 2 steps you take out, or 1 or 3, right?
Exactly.
It depends and that can only come from experience. Yeah.
Experience, yeah. But there's also a humility to a leader needs some level of humility to say, I know I need X, or I'm pretty sure I need X. I know like the book title, but I don't know anything about the chapters of the book and the nuances. So I need to hire, or I need to take someone on my team, send them to school, have them become the expert, and know when to defer to that expert. That I don't always see that level of humility in leaders.
Good point. Very good point. And that was oh boy. I'll get to that, but there's the 5 levels of leadership.
Oh, from laissez-faire to transformational. Yes,
and the 5th layer is humility, Ben. So you nailed it right there. And I'm trying to pull it up here, but yeah, is that 5th layer, Good to Great by Jim Collins, and it's that level 5 leadership.
Level 5 leader, yeah.
Exactly. So Ben, you hit it right there. Is that it's the humility piece that will speak volumes throughout the organization.
Sure. So there's translation, there's intentionality, there's humility, there's bridging those 2 worlds of academia in a broad sense, and then bringing that to a very specific situation in a unique environment in the real world. That's a lot of stuff to try to manage. I mean, my head is spinning with the complexity and the nuances. And so how do you wrap that into something that is practical and manageable? Or is that the magic?
I honestly think it comes down to the power of a team. As an individual, we can never know everything. And it took me a while to grapple with this. I had a mentor that said to me, Jen, do you realize that, yes, we have strengths and we have weaknesses or opportunities. You don't have to get better at all of your weaknesses. That's what a team's for. Sometimes it's more powerful to get better at your strengths. So you're the go-to person for that, but you know who the other go-to people are.
I love that. And that's awesome because now Cheryl and Jen go psychological safety, team psychological safety.
Oh, vital. Like you said, Jen. I mean, understanding what that really means is key to all of those, fearlessness and innovation. What is your reward? Speaking up. Being afraid to fail, or not afraid to fail, not, being afraid to ask questions and to really apply yourself and dig in, right?
Right. And I think just to go back a step, so team psychological safety is an environment in which all members of the team feel safe to speak up and take risks. And why is this important? Because this is the environment that is needed for innovative behavior, taking risks in a way that could help to further the business or whatever it is that you're looking to do, but also to uncover major risks, right? I could talk to you about a number of different companies where if those are ignored, you have much, much bigger problems, right?
You get a toxic workplace and you lose talent, right?
Oh, absolutely. Or people die. If you want to go into like medical or, aeronautical.
Or NASA, yeah.
I mean,
yes.
We can talk exactly. And so the repercussions for that are really far reaching. And I think that sometimes there is a misnomer around psychological safety that I just want to address really quickly. Please. And that is, it's squishy. Everybody's nice to each other. No, that is absolutely pretty much the opposite of what psychological safety is intended to be. Psychological safety is about raising standards of the team, holding each other accountable to the truth and being able to say difficult things so that the team can address them in a way that is effective. And so that is a difficult environment to create, and it takes a whole lot of trust.
It's the balance
and in the leadership.
It brings people out of their comfort zone, right? And there requires a tremendous amount of experience, patience, and interpretation, right? How far do you bring me out of my comfort zone to put issues on the table before I start feeling, bullied or harassed, right? There's all sorts of different kinds of conversations that have to happen in there to hold people accountable and raise the standard.
So let's take this another level. And there's research, and I have no clue where it is. But when you forget about even the fact of getting people to change their mindset and getting them safe. Mm-hmm. It's what are you measuring their scorecards on? So, for example, you can have two teams, and let's just say they're operational industrial teams, right? They're just building widgets, right? Sure. Well, one team is number one on production and QA. The defects are almost zero. How are they doing that, right? Well, the other team over here, right, is they're both being scored on defects, has a lot more defects. Why is that? What's going on? Turned out that one team had the psychological safety and was even though they were being measured on their amount of defects, they were the ones bringing it to a head saying, this is not good enough. We need to fix these products or services going out. The other team is being scored on the same scorecard, but they're rolling it out going, well, yeah, I feel okay if I said something, but I'm not going to get paid the way I do because I'm not going to meet my scorecard. So it's even a measurement as well that, to jump on what Jen and Cheryl were saying. So it's so many levels. I love it.
So many levels.
For sure.
Absolutely. And that goes back to Peter Drucker's famous quote, what gets measured gets managed. So we also need to think about what we're measuring, what the goals are as well. It's all tied together.
Sure.
I always think of it as that, and I don't know why the Progressive commercial, if everyone's special, no one's special. If we're all measuring the same thing, then we're not measuring the same thing. Like, I just feel like there's that level of, getting into that mix of measuring stuff, but measuring it just to measure versus measuring it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Goes back to that Thrive number. Russ should give us a commission, but Russ Lang and his company, they've got 7 categories, and they take it more than one time. Everything gets boiled down to a single number, the Thrive number, and they take it periodically over time. And leaders and everyone on the team gets to contribute. And the results of that and the discussions they have around what each of them think the number is and why is so revealing and so productive and often uncomfortable.
Well, I got to reiterate what Jen said. It's not squishy. It's more of a productivity state, but people, are owning it versus just kind of
pushing it under.
Yep.
To kind of reinforce I want to take a break for a second. When we come back, though, I want you to kind of address something, if you don't mind, because to make things not so squishy in this, from a consulting standpoint, we often have to tie some of this to costs and revenue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
yes.
I can see some of how we, what we're talking about here does that. And I was wondering if you can, when we come back, if you could address a little of that. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Perfect. Okay. We'll be right back.
Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, Our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So we've been talking about kind of bringing where the rubber meets the road here, right? And taking industrial organizational psychology and making it accessible and practical in the workplace, and how much more practical and relevant could it be than to tying it to what business leaders are actually looking for, which is profitability, right? How does it affect my cost? How does it affect my revenue? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's all about budget.
All the time, right?
I'll touch on this, and then Jen, you can. But I would say, first thing is it's a mindset, which then has to be followed by dollars. And so to change that mindset takes time, which a lot of companies don't have, and more money, right? In the initial onset.
Right.
The thing that I'm always looking for is how can I tie a 2-year plan that we can show the profits after these changes are implemented while staying under budget. And I think there's, back to the point on IO Psych from an academia place, there, they haven't, I don't know, too many, maybe they probably didn't build a budget for a company, right? Or look at a P&L statement for what we're doing, or how many FTEs they have. And that's the one thing that we can look into, is the fact that there's the budget constraints that are always going to come up. And that's another part of the failure, is that, oh, it's a great idea, let's implement it, but we don't have the budget to keep it going. And then there's no P&L or anything like that. There's nothing to it. So that's that common wheel that unfortunately happens a lot, because if you don't have the budget to follow through and it wasn't mapped out correctly, the profit's not going to follow.
Profits that can follow, yeah. Sure.
Right. And to add on to that, Larry, and I think that is an incredibly important point, right? We fund what's important. And so for someone being told, right, for someone being told to do this as a side gig off the side of their desk and not really getting funding for it, tells me that organization does not believe that whatever that is important. And so when we're talking about psychological safety, there was actually a recent MIT Sloan Management Review article published in August 2024 that is a case study on the investment bank SEB, which is a 168-year-old Nordic financial firm. They invested, this is an investment, right, of time and of money. And that's how we need to think of creating the right workplace environment, as an investment where you don't necessarily see returns immediately. You have to see returns over time, but they invested time and money into a senior management team training that helped them to enable better pool their knowledge and expertise, and also learn about the skills that they need in order to create a psychologically safe environment. And as a result, they were able to achieve revenues 25% above yearly targets in a strategically important market segment. Okay. So we do have cases where this works, and there are dollars and cents associated with it because you're able to open up, understand risks far earlier, get great ideas out on the table to be able to execute on a lot faster. But the timing element is really important here as well. And I think, and that is what Larry was touching on is, okay, well, we tried this for 6 months. It didn't seem to be doing what we wanted it to do, but abandon ship, let's go do something else. And I think that that's why we don't necessarily see some of the numbers that we would love to see coming out of this. But when there are cases out there where, you put that investment towards it, and you will see the outcomes or the return on your investment for it, right? To do the training, to increase the level of candor and perspective taking on teams in order to create that environment for better innovation and better firm outcomes in the end. So my 2 cents here is, this is not a short-term investment. This is like your retirement fund, okay? It's investment over time.
Yeah.
It's putting
Love it.
time and effort in order to reap benefits in the long run.
Jen, that's awesome. I love it. That's such a great analogy.
It's a great analogy.
Coming from folks in the finance that came
Right,
from the
exactly.
finance industry, right? Like, come on, that's great.
So, and also I would say too, this popped in my mind while Jim was talking, is, the organizations that are built on those principles, right? So like for those folks out there that are starting their own business, whatnot, Apple, Amazon, those companies that thrived off of those unique talents and building the environment where people can thrive versus people trying to conform to the environment, right? The environment conformed to the people. And I think that's the struggle where these companies now have to shift and put in that investment, just like they would put in their investment for infrastructure or IT or a new CRM or a new, whatever the case might be, or new computers, right? Sure. It's an investment, and it's one of those investments that you might not see a perfectly clear, we put in X, we get Y. It's not as simple, but it can be using the right, having a little patience too, which is hard in corporate.
But that's so cool because it makes me, Cheryl, remind me, it makes me think of something that you said earlier in terms of failing fast or learning fast and pivoting quickly. That can work in certain situations, like if you're doing a product development or you're trying to prototype something. But it seems like for creating a psychologically safe environment or building up that sort of courage within a team, it takes intentionality and it needs a lot of time to play out and infuse itself throughout the culture. And that's very different. And I see a lot of times leaders expecting a change to happen fairly quickly. And that can mean 3 months, it can mean 6 months, certainly not usually much longer than a year. And it seems like this type of thing is like, you'd be shocked to see big gains in 6 months. And you'd really need 2 years to start really seeing those benefits, Jen, like you were talking about in that study.
Right. And just really quick, Larry, going back to what you were saying about the scorecard too and leadership styles, the environment that we're talking about with companies like Apple, that transformational aspiration, right? And that has to take time to evolve, or it turns into the other kind of environment where there is a lot of fear and there is no psychological safety. And there is a domineering leadership that doesn't allow for failure or innovation. So it's all deeply connected, and not one of these threads can be taken out or on its own without the others to be successful. Right?
Yep. Yeah. Guess what happens when the leader loses interest?
Yeah.
Right? Like if you can get a leader that sticks with it, you'll see a much quicker progression than you will otherwise, because if the leader's not there to visibly have this environment, it doesn't just work with frontline management. It doesn't just work with middle managers. It has to start from the leader.
Quick sidebar. Do you think, sorry, Jen, go ahead.
Oh, no. All I was going to say is, and I think that's a call to action right there. We need leaders who are champions for environments of psychological safety, for environments where teams can learn, grow, bring up risks, and innovate in order to be truly successful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you think that change in the way that we're talking about it can transformation, can building that environment of psychological safety, does that have to start at the top, or can that start in pockets lower down? And if it can start lower down, is it gonna only get so far without leadership endorsement, buy-in?
So from my experience, I would say.
So I'm going to say, go ahead.
Oh, it can absolutely start at the team level. In fact, psychological safety is most important within a core team, right? I think that the ability to put time, effort, and resources towards that in some way, shape, or form needs leadership support in order to do things like funding. But individuals, at an individual level, we are all part of teams, and every single person has a responsibility for creating an environment of psychological safety. You can have a single toxic member and it can bring down the trust in the group.
Great.
And I will say, and ProSci has done a good job of this. Now they take it from the other side, and they'll talk about how the research shows that active and visible executive sponsorship is the top contributor to change success. Because if you
active, invisible,
correct,
and visible,
and visible,
yeah, exactly. So every week, every month, every year, the employees who are trying to change, right, and know that change is good, they need to make sure that the leader is active and visible about that, because then you don't, if they want to be safe and speak up to their manager, but their manager doesn't have that same mentality or is visible about it,
right?
How is that employee going to be safe and feel safe?
It slides back. That's right. Our next white paper, Larry, to your point, is about signaling. And this overlaps with that idea that you are suggesting, in that it's walking the walk, talking the talk from the top down.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Consistently, reliably, authentically.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's it. And once then, that's part of the model. If they're not engaged, so
people know.
Cool.
Right.
100%.
So as we're coming up to the where we're in that wrap up stage of our conversation here, let me just ask: is there one from each of you? Is there one tip, takeaway, something you really want to let the audience know from your perspective on how IO psychology can advance the workplace?
Ooh.
one thing.
Only one? Oh.
I'll give you both a moment. Go ahead. I'll give you an extra second for 30 seconds here. And just say that I am just so grateful to the two of you to be on the show to reinforce and strengthen the ideas that we've been talking about for these many months, 38 episodes before this, and helping people understand different perspectives on how important IO is in the workplace. And you've really brought it down to a frontline level in new ways. So thank you for that. And I think educating people and raising that awareness, I guess that's my answer too. So thank you for promoting that and helping us do so.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, to sum it up in one word is really a struggle for me, but I would just, and Carol DeWick talks about this with the change mindset. And then Ali Crum actually went the next level on the change mindset. So I would just say, that would just be the biggest, is mindset. If I was to use one word, is having that mindset. And the mindset could be different levels, depending on, where you're at in your organization. But understanding that it's not just one mindset. It has to be a variety of a couple.
Sure.
I love that.
Stay curious. Stay curious would be my advice.
Stay curious.
And that goes in so many different directions. Stay curious and not judgmental when you're amongst your teammates. Ask clarifying questions. Read voraciously when it comes to understanding various different theories and concepts that are out there and where others have gone before you. Stay curious.
Awesome. I love
It's
it.
fantastic.
Boy, I almost want to make that our sign off.
Yeah, what was it, Jen? The Dos Equis commercial? The most interesting man. Stay curious, my friends.
Now I kind of wish this wasn't Dos Equis.
I know.
Not
You won't
at
ask.
9 o'clock in the morning, though.
For the listeners, it's 5:00 right now, so it's good.
Well, Jen and Larry, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today.
Thank you so much.
bringing
Fantastic.
IO
Thank you.
to the listeners here. We'd love to hear from the listeners. We'd love to hear your feedback. Can you let us know how can people get in touch with you?
I would say
Absolutely.
LinkedIn for me.
LinkedIn?
Sorry, I would go also
Yep.
LinkedIn. I'm at Jennifer Adelhardt. So, but that would be
Perfect.
amazing. I
Great.
love connecting with folks on these topics. The more we can have people be curious, learn more, and apply, the better off we are going to be as a humanity. Love it. Thank you
Yep.
so much for the opportunity and for inviting us and
Yeah.
sharing the space today.
And one last thing I'll add to it, and I started off and I want to end this with Jen and I being on here, two different backgrounds, but coming together with our own ideas together. And I think that just expresses the whole idea of the whole IO psychology change framework, is that bringing other ideas and not trying to conform someone to your own idea. It's bringing your ideas to the table and figure out which one works best for the environment.
Sure.
Yeah, living examples.
Absolutely.
All right.
Having that just a diverse group of people with their different points of view just helps to make better decision making overall.
That's it.
Bravo.
Absolutely. And the curiosity to understand where those diverse people are coming from. It's all
Absolutely.
connected. Very good.
Well, folks, until next time, thanks a million for joining us, and make change your friend.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.